Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are advised that the following program contains images and voices of people who have died.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the Australian Vietnam Forces National Memorial on Anzac Parade, Canberra, for the National Commemorative Service to mark the 50th anniversary of the end of Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War. I'm Brigadier Hugh Meggett, and it is my great privilege to be your Master of Ceremonies this morning. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians present here today. The playing of the didgeridoo today was by Lance Corporal Carl Merkin Gayula of the North West Mobile Force on behalf of the Australian Defence Force. I'd also like to acknowledge the men and women of the Australian Defence Force and our veterans that are present here today. We thank you for your service. I now broadly acknowledge our official guests. His Excellency General, the Honourable David Hurley, Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, and Her Excellency Mrs Linda Hurley. The Honourable Matt Keogh, MP, Minister for Veterans Affairs and Defence Personnel, representing the Prime Minister of Australia. Ms Emma Davidson, MLA, Minister for Veterans, representing the ACT Chief Minister. Captain Blair Gerritsen, New Zealand Defence Advisor, on behalf of Her Excellency the Honourable Dame Annette King, High Commissioner of New Zealand. Colonel Shane Grease, United States Military Attaché, on behalf of Her Excellency Ms Caroline Kennedy, Ambassador of the United States of America. The Honourable Barnaby Joyce, MP, Shadow Minister for Veterans Affairs, representing the Leader of the Opposition. General the Honourable Sir Peter Cosgrove, General Angus Campbell, Chief of the Australian Defence Force, Mr Jeremy Hanson, MLA, representing the ACT Leader of the Opposition, Mr Keith Payne, BC, AM, senior representatives of the ex-service community, veterans, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Our service today begins with the march on of the Colour Party, followed by the mounting of the catafalque party. The Colour Party will lead to the memorial, the King's Colour of the Royal Australian Navy, the Australian Army banner, and the King's Colour of the Royal Australian Air Force. These preeminent colours of the three services symbolise the Australian Defence Force service traditions and are a reminder of the devotion and sacrifices of our predecessors and an inspiration to those who serve or who have served in the Australian Defence Force. There is no requirement for uniformed members to salute the colours as they march into position. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand. Please remain standing until the completion of the musical salute, Point of War. Uniformed members are reminded to salute during the playing of Point of War.
March on the colours! Australian Federation Guard! Royal Salute, present arms!
Colour Party! By the centre, Queen!
Catafalque Party! I bow to good order of Catafalque Party! Present arms! Catafalque Party! Reverse! Catafalque Party! Slow! Catafalque Party! Halt! Catafalque Party! At 1, 2! Catafalque Party! Rest on!
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. An Australian Defence Force Tri-Service Guard, provided today by Australia's Federation Guard, will now march on and take up position in front of the memorial. Please remain seated whilst this occurs.
Guard, shoulder up. Guard will fall, cover, right turn. Good! Positive! Crane!
I would now like to make a special acknowledgement to the 60,000 Australian troops who served in the Vietnam War, to the some 35,000 Vietnam veterans still with us today, and to those who have passed since their service. We have come together today to honour your service and acknowledge the physical and emotional scars that have resulted, to honour the sacrifice of your families and your loved ones, and finally, to honour those 523 who were tragically killed as a result of their service during the war. Their ultimate sacrifice can never be repaid. We remember their names, provided in the roll of honour at the rear of your order of service, and their faces you see on the right of the memorial. We remember them today as family, as partners, as mates. Brigadier Colin Khan, who is present here today, former commanding officer of the 5th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment in Vietnam, described mateship as the barbed wire bonding of men under fire. They fought well because of mutual respect, for love for the team, the unit to which they belonged. The invisible threads that pulled and bound the unit together pulled at everyone, and you couldn't or wouldn't let the team down. There is no doubt that those who served in Vietnam built on the legacies of those who served before them. Your service shaped not only your generation, but those who followed. You have worked to make veteran services better than what you experienced and mentored many of our former senior leaders, helping to guide the actions and decisions of today. You have shaped the generation of servicemen and women who stand here in honour of you today. I now ask all Vietnam veterans present here today and those who may be watching at home to please stand. All other attendees, including uniformed personnel, are to remain seated. We say to all Vietnam veterans and their families, thank you. We are forever grateful to each and every one of you. Today, Australia thanks you for your service.
Australia's Federation Guard, General Salute, present arms! Good, shoulder, arms!
Please be seated.
Guard will move to the right in column of route. Alright, turn! Good, by the right, quick, march!
I now invite Mr. Robert Redmond to deliver the call to remembrance. Mr. Redmond served in Vietnam as a pilot for No. 9 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force, and is currently the President of the No. 9 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force Association.
The call to remembrance. Some 60,000 Australians served in the war in South Vietnam. Those men and women representing all three arms of service, along with a number of civilians, were engaged in myriad experiences, both common and unique. They were experiences largely unknowable to, and little imagined by the Australian public who were following the war from afar. For the thousands that served in the south of Vietnam, they were experiences that built on Australian traditions in war, but which most who served in country thought could only be understood by other veterans. Many veterans returned home feeling different, as Robert Bell, a regular soldier in the Medical Corps, observed of himself. I came home a different person, and I couldn't believe how 12 months in Vietnam had changed me so much. That experience matured me very quickly, and that's probably why I couldn't relate to my past friends. Those who served in Vietnam had left Australia as young men and women and returned with a new maturity that belied their youth. It might be said that they had been robbed of precious years, and certainly many felt, as Robert Bell did, that Vietnam had defined and changed them. Reflecting on her time in Vietnam, nurse Yvonne Bolton remembered the feeling of purpose found in caring for people wounded in war. I was pleased that I was there because I felt that I was doing a pretty worthwhile job. I remember how hard I worked and how stressful it was. It was a very emotional time. She returned with a heightened sense of what she called dedication to the necessity of work. The passage of time, half a century since Australia's official involvement ended in Vietnam, has allowed some veterans to become both comfortable and proud of their service. Looking back on his time in Vietnam, Jim Gable, a Royal Australian Air Force veteran, expressed his feelings. I'm proud of the fact that I had a job to do and that I did it the way I was trained to do, and that sometimes I used some initiative of my own. And the last feeling I get is that a feeling of contentment that I've got a great set of friends who went through the same thing as me. The profound experience of war service left its mark on many who returned from Vietnam. The same airman spoke of reliving a traumatic episode that came back to me quite often. On many nights, a recurring dream took him back to the war after he came home. But as time has blunted the memory's sharpest edges and the nightmare has faded, his pride remains. Scores of years after flying his last operation, pride and true friendship remain Vietnam's enduring legacy in his life. During the years of war, and in its immediate aftermath, when deep divisions remained, veterans who felt proud of their service hesitated to share their experiences. Concern at public protest and widespread anti-war sentiments led many veterans to keep their own counsel. The effect of this was recalled by Tony I, a naval clearance diver. Not a day goes by that I don't think about Vietnam, and I think the main reason for that is the way we were treated when we came home. We were second-class citizens and we thought we had done a great job. We were very proud of what we did. We did our best and we came home to a pretty bad reception. Many veterans might share these sentiments. Others might recall a less fraught homecoming. One man, remembering the welcoming crowds as his battalion paraded through Sydney on the day of his return, said, "If that was not gratitude for service, I do not know what is. It was good to feel appreciated." Today, we acknowledge the long shadow the war cast over individuals and their families. We reflect not only on the sacrifices made by servicemen and women, but also on the anxiety and fear of those who waited for them to return. We honour all who served in Vietnam, military personnel and civilians, who carried out their work and their duty in demanding and difficult circumstances. And especially we honour those 523 Australians who lost their lives. Lest we forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Redman. The commemorative address today will be delivered by the Honourable Matt Keogh, MP, Minister for Veterans Affairs and Defence Personnel.
I too would like to start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we come to commemorate today, and to pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who join us here today. I acknowledge His Excellency the Governor-General and Mrs Hurley, all of our dignitaries and our current serving personnel, but most importantly, our veterans that join us here today in person and who are watching from at home. This year, we mark 50 years since the end of Australia's official involvement in the Vietnam War. August 18th has long held special significance for our Vietnam veteran community. On this day in 1966, the men of the 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, alongside 3 New Zealanders from 161 Battery, Royal New Zealand Artillery, encountered the Viet Cong in a rubber plantation outside the village of Long Tan. In the ensuing battle, the Australians and New Zealanders were outnumbered 10 to 1. 18 Australians lost their lives and 24 were wounded. It was the single greatest loss of life Australia suffered during the Vietnam War. In the years that followed, you came together to remember your mates who were lost that fateful day. And now we gather to commemorate all those who served in Vietnam. Some 60,000 Australians served in Vietnam over more than a decade from 1962. They were nurses and aviators, soldiers and sailors, engineers, civilian aid workers, volunteers and national servicemen. Some 3,000 were wounded in the line of duty. 523 lost their life. Today, we stand in view of the Australian War Memorial. The names of those who gave their lives for our nation are forever enshrined on its hallowed walls. People whose families half a century on mourn them and love them still. The passage of time has done little to dim that love or dispel that pain. Today we remember all those who died in the service of our nation, and we give thanks to all those who served. We also acknowledge the significant loss of life experienced by the people of Vietnam. Today, Australia and Vietnam stand together as friends, and together we acknowledge the impact of war and work to strengthen the bonds our countries now share. Bonds not only of geography, but of a shared commitment to regional stability and security and to economic opportunity and development. The Vietnam War was fought during a time of great upheaval, of disruption in our region and across the globe. Conscription, civil rights, protests, the Cold War, Cultural Revolution, moratoria, the Summer of Love and the moon landing. And to this day, debate remains about Australia's involvement in this war. But when we step back, one truth remains. The Australians who served did themselves, their mates and our nation proud. For those of us who did not serve, it is difficult to imagine what conditions in Vietnam were like. Without fail, most people's first impression was of the oppressive heat. Veteran Terry Rowe once said, "When in operation in the dry season, the sweat would flow from your brow after just 15 minutes. An ever-present red dust hung in the air, triggering conjunctivitis and asthma attacks. During the monsoon, the dust would turn to mud. It would rain without end. Troops would go to sleep drenched and wake still waterlogged. Disease was prevalent. Some of the biggest dangers in Vietnam were the smallest: malaria, Japanese encephalitis, dengue fever and typhus. And beyond the environment, there was the enemy, adversaries adept at guerrilla warfare. They knew the land could strike suddenly and disappear just as fast. And on top of that was Agent Orange, chemicals and herbicides. But despite these threats, the fear many service personnel have expressed in the decades since wasn't of disease, heat, rain. It wasn't of the enemy or injury. Their biggest fear was letting their mates down. It didn't matter if they were a driver, a medic, a clearance diver, an infantryman, a pilot or an engineer. Everyone wanted to do their job and do it well. They knew they were part of a team. They knew others were relying on them. So despite the conditions, they pushed through. Veteran Peter Harron once said the Vietnam War reflected Australia's character. It showed all the good things about Australians under extreme, extraordinary conditions. And when we speak of the Anzac spirit, this is what we evoke. It's about knowing no matter how dire the circumstances, your mates will always have your back. That was the spirit in which our men and women served in Vietnam. But when our veterans returned home, many felt unsupported, unrecognised. The question of conscription and national service divided Australia. The public was disillusioned by a war presented for the first time on their TV screens at home. In 1973, there was no homecoming parade for returning service personnel. 50 years on, we are here to express our heartfelt gratitude for the service our Vietnam veterans gave in our name. As Prime Minister Albanese said earlier this year, we honour you, we thank you, and we are so sorry it took us so long as a nation to do so. You deserve better. You served with distinction. You served with honour. And even after you returned home and took off your uniforms, you continued to fight. You saw how the experiences of war were affecting your mates. You saw them struggle with the memories and trauma of service and the lack of support they had. And so you fought again for your mates, and you didn't quit until a dedicated counselling service, the Vietnam Veteran Counselling Service, now in the form of Open Arms, was established. Today, Open Arms supports all current and former serving Defence Force personnel and their families. The support it offers is informed by your experiences. It is an enduring legacy that you can all be proud of. Army nurse and veteran Pam Barlow once said, Australians in Vietnam showed great courage. If people back home had only witnessed how these young men conducted themselves in battle and death, there would have been no protests. I know, I was there. To me, the legacy of our service personnel in Vietnam is clear. You were given an impossible job and you did it well. You did it in a way that has made your nation proud, and you looked out for your mates every step of the way. Then, you had to fight the RSL and other ex-service organisation leadership for recognition and support. Now, you look out for the next generation, with many of you now leaders of our ex-service organisations, veteran advocates or welfare officers working to make sure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. Today, we honour your service, so that 50 years from now, generations yet unborn will see this memorial. They will see those names enshrined on our national memorial, and they will know your story. They will know what you endured and what you did for our nation. On behalf of all Australians, thank you for your service, lest we forget.
Thank you, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, today's musical piece, Stand By Me, will be performed by musician Wesley Tangaloa, Corporal Sam MacDonald, and musician Anthony Tenikoff of the band of the Royal Military College.
When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see, no, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now, stand by me. If the sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, or the mountains should crumble to the sea, I won't cry, I won't cry, no, I won't shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now, stand by me, stand by me. When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see, no, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand now, stand by me, stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand now, stand by me, stand by me. Oh, stand now, stand by me, stand by me. Oh, stand now, stand by me.
Ladies and gentlemen, I now invite Mr. David Manolis to deliver the veteran reading. Mr. Manolis served in HMAS Sydney 3 and HMAS Duchess during the Vietnam War and is the current National President of the Naval Association of Australia.
As part of this commemorative service, I've been asked to recount some of my experiences while serving in HMAS Sydney during the Vietnam War. The Sydney was a post-World War II era aircraft carrier, refitted as a fast troop transport in 1962. She undertook 25 voyages to the south of Vietnam in support of the 1st Australian Task Force between May 1965 and November 1972. These voyages earned her the nickname the Vung Tau Ferry. The Sydney, along with the Australian Merchant Navy vessels Japarit and Boonaroo, transported the majority of the Australian personnel and equipment contributed to the Vietnam War effort. The Army's 32 small ship squadron also played their part in transporting stores, munitions and vehicles from Australia and in-country in Vietnam. I was one of the mostly 16-year-old trainee sailors who joined the ship in October 1966. On the 8th of April 1967, with 7 RAR embarked, Sydney departed her namesake city for her 5th voyage to Vietnam. On this occasion, she had the destroyer Vampire as escort, and Wessex anti-submarine helicopters had been embarked for the first time. I can recall that apart from what looked to be seasoned non-commissioned officers, most of the diggers were also very young. As it was for practically all within the Navy, most of the embarked forces were volunteers, but also amongst their ranks were 20-year-old conscripts. On the voyage to Vietnam, the Army were kept busy with physical training, weapon firing practice and other training activities. The ship's crew performed their ongoing shipboard duties along with safety and emergency drills, helicopter flying operations and main armament weapon drills. Overall, the atmosphere, particularly for the embarked forces, was generally subdued. With the crew at a heightened degree of readiness, the ship had been completely darkened throughout the night as we neared Vietnam. As we made our final approach into Vung Tau on 20th April, there was a lot for the ship's crew to get on with. Damage control, defence readiness measures activated, helicopters deployed to conduct patrols ahead of the ship, ladders and cranes made ready, ship's boats turned out in readiness to conduct anti-submarine patrols whilst we were at anchor. Ammunition provided to the ship's armament, ship's divers ready to conduct hull searches, and upper deck sentries armed and positioned. There's always so much going on, vehicles and stores being offloaded onto barges, US Sky Crane helicopters airlifting heavy stores containers and vehicles ashore. Troops ferried ashore in landing craft, US Chinook and US and Australian Iroquois helicopters. Our mission was to see the troops and their gear safely disembarked and at another time safely embarked for the return journey back to Australia. If this could be done in a timely manner, it assisted in minimising the risks of attack upon the Sydney and her escort. The passage home was altogether different. Whilst most of the deployed forces would sail home, those brought home by air would find themselves back in Australia having left the realities of combat just days before. Those in the Sydney had a number of days at sea in the company of their mates, therein sharing in natural debriefing through camaraderie. We would subsequently learn that to their detriment, few Vietnam veterans were formally debriefed after their tour of duty. As we neared home, the diggers could be seen cleaning their uniforms, webbing and weapons ready for their disembarkation. As I weaved my way through a group who had taken up all the available deck space to clean their gear, one digger was carefully cleaning his bayonet. Without warning, he stabbed a picture in one of the old newspapers spread out before him. Later, I was told there was a story and image of an anti-war protest back in Australia, and it had understandably angered him. The Sydney was no longer as trim as she once was. It was fortunate that Vaynant had not hit a rusty spot where he may well have pierced the steel deck. In the Vietnam War, the Navy served in long deployments at sea, ashore, in the air and the inland waters of Vietnam. We also served in the logistics support role. All endured the effects to varying degrees then and soon after, and as with so many veterans, it would come upon us much later in life. This anniversary is a time for veterans to look back on their service and deservedly reflect with pride on the part they played in Australia's longest 20th century conflict. As has been said, Vietnam, it changed the life of all of us, lest we forget.
Thank you, Mr Manolis. I now invite Mrs Judy Ann Honke, accompanied by Principal Air Chaplain James Cox of the Royal Australian Air Force, to lead us in a prayer of commemoration. Mrs Honke's father, leading aircraftsman Duncan McNair, was tragically killed while serving in Vietnam with No. 9 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force. Duncan's wife and a number of his descendants are here with us today.
Well, it's a great honour to share this time of prayer with Mrs Judy Ann Honke. This opportunity to commemorate 50 years since the end of the Vietnam War offers a space to reflect on the cost of those many freedoms and values that inform and shape our lives today. As we come to this time of prayer, may we embrace together the freedom of religion for all individuals, regardless of beliefs, that defines our nation. Given this freedom, may I invite you to enter into this time of prayer and to hold the words shared through the faith perspective or lens that gives your life meaning. Let us pray. God of the ages, we thank you for this time to gather, to reflect, and to remember. Today we ask you to meet with us at this time of commemorating the end of the Vietnam War, as we hold in our hearts all who served. We remember those 60,000 Australian men and women who responded and gave of themselves through their service. We remember those who paid the supreme sacrifice and those who returned with wounds to body, heart, and soul. May our observance today be a timely reminder that the freedoms we celebrate today were purchased at high cost and should not be taken for granted. May we honour their service by working diligently for peace in our world, in the hope our children might know a world without war and we might find a better way, your way, the way of love. Amen.
God of life, we give thanks that the lives of those we honour today are known and loved by you. We will remember today all who served at Vietnam. We remember those who made the supreme sacrifice. We remember those who returned and the struggles they faced to be validated. And for many, the internal war that they lived or continued to live out. For those whose bodies and spirits are scarred by a fall, we would pray for you to embrace each one with your love and comfort. Would you heal their wounds? We hold each one today and honour their sacrifice and ask your blessing upon them. We also remember today their families and loved ones who lived out of their own place of struggling and suffering. We ask you to be with each one. Would you bless and comfort them at this time? Would you speak into their hearts and comfort them in the knowledge that their service was also valued. God of creation, would you bring healing to our nations? Would you restore the country of Vietnam and her people? Would you lead us forward together as we seek to work for a better world, a world without war? God of hope, may we never forget the costly service of the Vietnam War. May this time of commemoration inspire us to continue to pursue the blessings of life, liberty, and justice for everyone. Loving God, let us trust our lives into your care. Amen.
And a prayer for the Australian Defence Force. Eternal God, the source of peace, we pray for all who serve in the Defence Force of this land. Give them courage and comfort in danger, patience in waiting, and discipline in the just use of force. Help us to seek for all people the freedom to serve you and each other in compassion and peace. I ask this through Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Mrs. Honke and Chaplain Cox. Wreaths will now be laid by official representatives. The first wreath will be laid by His Excellency General, the Honourable David Hurley, Governor-General of the Commonwealth of Australia, and Her Excellency Mrs. Linda Hurley on behalf of the Commonwealth of Australia. The next wreaths will be laid on behalf of the Australian Federal Government and people of Australia by the Honourable Matt Keogh MP, Minister for Veterans Affairs and Defence Personnel, representing the Prime Minister of Australia, and the Honourable Barnaby Joyce MP, Shadow Minister for Veterans Affairs, representing the Leader of the Federal Opposition. The next wreath will be laid on behalf of the Government and people of the Australian Capital Territory by Ms Emma Davidson MLA, Minister for Veterans representing the ACT Chief Minister, and Mr Jeremy Hanson MLA representing the ACT Leader of the Opposition. The next wreaths will be laid on behalf of the Government and people of New Zealand and the United States of America by Captain Blair Gerritsen, New Zealand Defence Advisor, on behalf of Her Excellency the Honourable Dame Annette King, New Zealand High Commissioner, and Colonel Shane Grease, United States Military Attaché, on behalf of Her Excellency Ms Caroline Kennedy, Ambassador of the United States of America. The next wreaths will be laid on behalf of the 523 Australians who tragically lost their lives as a result of the Vietnam War. Mrs Jeanette Hybleski and Mr Glenn Duncan McNair, the widow and son of leading aircraftsman Duncan McNair. Ms Sonia Newcombe, granddaughter of Warrant Officer Class 2 Jack Fitzgerald. Mr James Karma, brother of Lance Corporal John Karma. And Mr George Wheatley, son of Warrant Officer Class 2 Kevin Wheatley, VC. The next wreath will be laid on behalf of all men and women of the Australian Defence Force by General Angus Campbell, Chief of the Defence Force. The next wreaths will be laid on behalf of all Australian veterans of the Vietnam War by Mr David Manolis, who served in ships HMAS ships Sydney 3 and Duchess, and Mr James Henry of Clearance Diving Team 3, representing the Royal Australian Navy, Mr Ian Gollings, one of the first deployed with the Australian Army Training Team Vietnam, and Mr Christopher Stevens, one of the last to return home with the Royal Australian Armoured Corps, representing the Australian Army, and Mr Carl Schiller and Mr Lance Halverson, both serving in Vietnam with No. 2 Squadron, representing the Royal Australian Air Force. It is now time to reflect and to silently remember all those who have served and died in war. Please stand for the Ode of Remembrance, which will be followed by the last post, 1 minute of silence and rouse. The Ode will be recited by Mr. Peter Rosemond, who served in Vietnam as a tank commander in both Alpha and Bravo Squadron, 1st Armoured Regiment. Following his service in Vietnam, Mr. Rosemond had a distinguished military career, culminating with his appointment as the Regimental Sergeant Major of the Army.
They shall grow not old. Just pause. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
Catapult fighting! 18! Catapult fighting! PC! On! Catapult fighting! Shall die! Out!
Please remain standing for the Australian National Anthem.
Cancel party! Present! Out!
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil. Our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Cancel party! Shoulder! Out! Cancel party! Order! Out!
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. We'll now continue the wreath laying for this morning's commemorative service. I ask those not laying a wreath to please remain seated. Firstly, wreaths will be laid by families and descendants of those who served in the Vietnam War. Those of you wishing to lay a wreath on behalf of a family member, please make your way forward to the memorial now. Representatives from service organisations and associations are now invited to come forward and lay wreaths. Wreaths will be laid on behalf of the Returned and Services League of Australia, Legacy Australia, Australian War Widows, Australian Federation of Totally and Permanently Incapacitated Ex-Servicemen and Women, Vietnam Veterans Association of Australia, and the Vietnam Veterans Federation of Australia. Air Force Association of Australia, Headquarters 1st Australian Task Force, Partners of Veterans Association, Australian Army Training Team Vietnam Association, and the National Servicemen's Association of Australia. The Vietnam Veterans Federation of Australia, ACT branch, Returned and Services League, ACT branch, Australian War Widows, ACT branch, HMAS Sydney Association, Royal Australian Navy Clearance Divers Association, Australian Merchant Marine. Third Cavalry Regiment Vietnam Association, 1st Armoured Regiment Association, Royal Australian Artillery Historical Company, 101st Battery Association, 103rd Field Battery Association, the 105th Battery Royal Australian Regiment Association. the 107th Battery Association, A Battery Association, 104th Field Battery, 131 Div Locators Association, Corps of Royal Australian Engineers, 32 Small Ship Squadron Association, the Royal Australian Survey Corps. Royal Australian Signals Association, Royal Australian Regiment Corporation, 1 RAR Association, 2 RAR Association, 3 RAR Association, 4 RAR Association. Association, 6 RAR Association, 7 RAR Association, 8 RAR Association, 9 RAR Association. Australian Special Air Service Association, Royal Australian Army Service Corps, Vietnam Supply Platoons Association, Royal Australian Army Medical Corps Association, 1st Australian Field Hospital Association, and 17 Construction Squadron Workshops Vietnam Association. Number 35 Squadron, RAAF. Number 2 Squadron, RAAF Association. 161 Reconnaissance Association. 9 Squadron, RAAF Association. Officer Training Unit, Shieville Association. I now invite any other veterans, related associations, ex-service organisations and members of the public to come forward and lay their wreaths and floral tributes. Ladies and gentlemen, the final wreath today will be laid on behalf of all civilians who served in Vietnam as part of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organisation by civilian nurse Dr. Dorothy Angel, OAM, and radiographer Mrs. Barbara Sutherland.
If this program has raised any concerns, you may wish to contact one of these services. Open Arms, 1800 011 046. Soldier On, 1300 620 380. Lifeline, 1311 14.